Chapter 22, Solari Inc President. Just as interesting is this question and answer session that the Daily Bell held with Solari Inc President, Catherine Austin Fitz. In the past she has served as MD and member of the board of directors of Wall Street investment bank Dillon, Read & Company DB. For those who don't know, give us a rundown of your current business and economic preoccupations. Cath. I publish the Solari Report, a private bridge call and blog focused on building personal and family wealth. I also provide investment advisory services through Solari Investment Advisory Services LLC and CLA Advisory LLC. DB, give us a sense of your background and childhood. Cath. I grew up in Philadelphia. As a child I witnessed the destruction of wealth by networks engaged in organized crime and financial fraud and the covert operations that supported them. It started a lifelong fascination with understanding how money and the financial system work, including in places, and how healthy cultures could prevail. My mother was an economist who retired from the Philadelphia Federal Reserve to have kids. My father was a surgeon. I watched them struggle with the growing corruption as it ultimately tore our family apart. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and received an MBA at Wharton. After graduation I went to work at Dillon, Read & Company Inc. It's now part of UBS. I kept moving from one area and type of work to another within the firm, trying to understand different parts of the economy and financial system. After I became managing director and board member we sold the firm, and after our contracts ended numerous members of the firm joined the Bush administration. In 1989, I became Assistant Secretary of Housing, Federal Housing Commissioner. After serving the Bush administration for 18 months, and deeply disturbed by the mortgage fraud, I left and started an investment bank, Hamilton Securities Group. My hope was to use software technology and the internet to help decentralize the capital raising process in a manner that could, in combination with government re-engineering, revive the U.S. economy and improve pension fund returns as globalization was shifting significant employment and income abroad. Decentralizing the economy in a manner that grows decentralized equity ownership was not the direction taken by Washington and Wall Street. Instead, the strong dollar policy was instituted and the debt bubble, led by a global housing debt bubble, financed enormous shifts of capital globally in a manner that aggressively centralized political and economic control. To help facilitate the U.S. housing bubble, the federal government targeted Hamilton. I spent 11 years engaged in litigation. This process forced me to research the U.S. black budget, including related organized crime and financial fraud both domestically and globally. I have described these events in detail in writings available online. During that time I had a number of private families request my assistance in protecting their assets from the risks created by the changes underway. I found that I liked helping individuals and families directly. Consequently I started Solari Investment Advisory Services, DB. Are things getting better or worse from a corruption and freedom standpoint in the United States? Cath. Things are getting worse. On a positive note, there are some advantages to have the beast come out of the closet. DB, give us a summary of your perspective regarding Wall Street, and what happened to you in a little more detail. Cath. I think Wall Street is the pit bull, not the master. The $64,000 question is, of course, who is really in charge and why are they behaving this way? I have had the opportunity to operate at high levels in Washington and Wall Street and have never met a person who did not function as if they were a prisoner of the system. Often, that system did not permit them to function on a lawful basis. This implies highly centralized governance if this many people are functioning in an insecure, limited or unlawful way. The people who manage our financial system are also operating with significant double binds. This is what I try to describe with my red button story. In the summer of 2000, I asked a group of 100 people, at a conference of spiritually committed people, if they would push a red button to immediately stop all narcotics trafficking in their neighborhood, city, state and country. 99 of them said that they wouldn't press the button. When surveyed, they didn't want their mutual funds to go down if the U.S. financial system stopped attracting an estimated $500 billion, $1 trillion a year in global money laundering. They did not want their government checks jeopardized or their taxes raised because of potential deficits. So it is not appropriate to assume that the corruption is just at the top. Indeed, most citizens in the first world have been the economic beneficiary of what James Turk calls the central banking warfare model. At the same time, we have all been limited by suppression or control of knowledge and technology that could significantly improve global living standards. The spiritual, environmental and cultural costs of this model are enormous. What my experience helped me to understand is that we are governed by a group of people who have the power to kill, and otherwise break the law, with impunity. As the Secretary of HUD once said in my presence, I don't have to obey the law, I report to a higher moral authority. This power appears to come from, in part, the ability to use deeply invasive digital systems to gather intelligence, transact and monitor, as well as from invisible weaponry, including satellites and weaponry controlled or delivered from space. As Western countries move investment into the emerging markets, their satellites and military move to police this global investment. Investors do not invest where they cannot enforce, so in a sense, financial globalization is pressuring the United States to become a global military empire. DB, can Wall Street be cleaned up? CAF, of course. However, before it can, the question is, what is the investment and financial model that will replace the central banking warfare model, and how will it be implemented? Part of the economic warfare that is raging throughout the financial markets relates to the squabbles between the different countries and factions that want to come out on top. The greater the uncertainty about the model and the greater the change, the uglier the process will be. Depending on the politics, market forces and new technology have the potential to significantly reduce Wall Street's market share in the global financial system. DB, can a regulator do it? CAF, our society has integrated warfare with financial markets. So for example, if we want to checkmate the Chinese, the oil price is driven up. Or when the Treasury wanted to bubble the dollar, the gold price was suppressed. Yelling at the SEC or the CFTC to regulate more is not going to solve the problem. In a sense, to regulate in these markets you need the SEC to team up not only with the CFTC but also with the DoD and ONI, and they need to coordinate with their counterparts around the world, and you need greater literacy in the investing public about how financial systems really work. Our political class believes that dumbing people down and using controlled media, entrainment technology and subliminal programming to manipulate is the way forward. DB, does financial regulation work? Will more work better? CAF, more laws or regulation will not address the underlying failure of enforcement and the need for a new investment model. DB, would markets be better off if they were more free and private watchdogs were allowed to take over from public ones? CAF, not necessarily. Again, we need to address the question, who is the breakaway civilization? What are their weaponry and surveillance systems, and what systems will work successfully to shift their behavior in a positive manner? This of course leads to additional questions. such as what do they know that we do not know, and how would we behave if we had that knowledge. Setting private watchdogs to regulate these guys is a bit like landing on Normandy Beach with a water pistol. A few regulators are an easy target. Millions of private citizens and investors shunning dirty players in the markets are not. Globally, they become a mighty force. However, that means that as a cultural matter the human race must become deeply committed to respecting everyone's individual rights, not just one's own. DB, are central banks responsible for much of the current chaos? CAF, this takes us back to the central question, who is in charge and why are they behaving the way they are behaving? I don't think we know the answer to those questions. DB, would you like to see central banks shut down? Or do you think banks like the Fed ought to be nationalized, as Ms. Ellen Brown wants? CAF, I agree that a Federal Reserve System under the ownership and control of the United States government would better serve us in a system in which the information and clearance systems are owned, controlled and operated by government employees, not by private defense contractors, and where the rules regarding access to information are strictly observed and enforced. Of course, that means we would have to return the Treasury and U.S. agency information systems back to government employee management. During the hearings on Enron, I pointed out that the Department of Justice had not asserted control of Enron's documents. However, as the chairman of Enron Finance Committee was a key investor and board member in a company that was running information systems for the Department of Justice and the SEC, it would appear that Enron insiders had asserted control of the government's documents. Can you imagine investigating someone who is a controlling investor in a company running the information systems for your enforcement division? How is that supposed to work? Financial sovereignty requires information sovereignty. DB, let's switch gears. If the US is an empire, will this century see another power rise to challenge it? China perhaps. CAF, the greatest threat to hegemony in Asia is Japan. Or at least it was Japan until Fukushima happened. I don't underestimate the threat that Germany poses, particularly if we get a real split of the Anglo-American alliance from the continent as a result of the rearrangements around the euro and Germany grows closer to Russia. Remember, one of the reasons that the EU happened was that the rest of Europe, with bitter memories of World War I and World War II, wanted to integrate Germany into the whole of Europe. China is formidable, but they are checkmated by the need to feed and employ such a large population. Right now, the United States led in satellites, weaponry and control of the sea lanes makes it dominant. The question is how long that can continue if America itself devolves into a barbaric country. Force and technology alone do not result in greatness, and the invasiveness of the model has become not just financially oppressive but deeply perverted. As China is burdened with a large population, the US has an aging population that is not prepared for the changes underway. How the US is going to manage their expectations and fund their retirement is an unanswered question. DB, the invention of the Gutenberg press was, in our opinion, the proximate cause, eventually, of the 30 Years' Peasant War that raged across Europe, a war generated by an elite that had the most to lose from the Gutenberg press's ability to bring literacy to the masses. Are we seeing a similar paradigm today? CAF, yes. Digital technology permits higher learning speeds generally. However, it also makes highly centralized management and manipulation possible, aka the Matrix. DB, is war necessary for those in charge of the United States empire to maintain control? CAF, yes. The US empire is financially dependent on the violation of individual rights globally and access to cheap natural resources. This requires various forms of covert and economic warfare as well as overt military wars. DB, once the empire topples, or as it does, will another take its place? CAF, I do not assume that the empire will topple. It has the ability to not topple. Whether it does or not is a political and military question, not an economic or financial question. The empire's challenge is how to maintain liquidity without trust and how to maintain productivity without markets. It is trying to do too much with force and covert methods. If it does topple, the competition to become the regional hegemons will accelerate and organized crime will move into the power vacuum. As ugly as the empire can be, there are uglier forces at work. Ask yourself, does the Russian mafia have nuclear weapons? I assume so. DB, what would be the result of more global centralization? CAF, it would be more of the same, including increases in poverty, slavery and depopulation. Aaron Russo knew what he was talking about when he warned us that these folks want spy chips in everyone and everything. DB, is a gold standard or a gold and silver standard the normal outcome of a peaceful, market-based society? CAF, not necessarily. Currency systems are part of governance systems. We should look at the currency question integrated into the question of who is going to govern and manage and in what process with what kinds of disclosure. There are many attractive features of a gold and silver standard. However, the ownership of precious metals is limited to a small group of the global population. If we adopt gold and silver as our currency standard, it will benefit a small group of people in a manner that could make things worse. I would far prefer that though to a digital system working through the internet and handheld devices that allow all financial data to be centrally accessed and controlled. DB, does the internet have a role in a new monetary system? CAF, yes. However, the internet is the ultimate surveillance op. DB, is the Austrian school making substantial inroads? CAF, yes, thank heavens. I was just at a wonderful conference in Switzerland and heard some of the most terrifying proposals for a world without money. I kept trying to explain to the most wonderful people that after you have turned over trillions of dollars of bailout money to one group who now has centralized tremendous ownership and power, to voluntarily swear off money means to decrease your power in a way that increases theirs. Is that a good idea? DB, what about the EU and the Euro? Will either or both survive? CAF, force can make any system go, if you apply enough force and are willing to tolerate sufficient wealth destruction and depopulation. My expectation is that the euro will survive for some time with fewer countries subject to the Lisbon Treaty. The euro as a currency system makes no sense. Europe has different people, with different languages, in different economies. There is no we here. Different currencies would allow markets to work. So Europe would be wealthier with different currencies, but then the people centralizing the economy would not be able to pick up equity cheap in the pigs with disaster capitalism tactics. Do they have the force to keep the system going? Yes, at least until enough people can see the game for what it is, and are prepared to act in the face of force. DB, what are the fundamental issues pertaining to a healthy recovery? CAF, we have to get to the bottom of who has been centralizing and why, what is the technology they have and where it is they are planning to go with this. DB, is there a power elite that is trying to create a one-world government? If so, is it succeeding? CAF, yes, there is a concerted effort to create a one-world government and evolve to a one-world currency. It has been succeeding. As the financial coup d'etat becomes more obvious, centralization is entering a critical stage as more and more people globally react negatively to the effort and related tactics. Indeed, our current currency wars reflect a natural pulling away from centralization that is healthy. Mentioning the euro, Nobel Prize-winning economist Oliver Hart said in December 2016, that the euro was a mistake and it wouldn't be a bad thing at all if in the future Europe abandons the single currency. He also said that the EU should start the decentralization process and give the right of decision-making to its member states. He told the European media platform Euractiv that Brussels has gone too far in centralizing power, and if it abandons this trend the EU could survive and flourish, otherwise it could fail. The British-born economics professor from Harvard said that the 28 EU member states are not sufficiently homogeneous to be considered one single entity, and trying to tie them into one was an error, he said. He also added that the British were very clever to stay out of the single currency. Another Nobel Prize-winning economist called Joseph Stiglitz published a book describing the euro as a threat to the future of Europe. He also said that the single currency is designed to hold together a region with enormous economic and political diversity is almost incapable of working, and the eurozone was flawed at birth and destined to collapse unless massive changes are made to its common currency. Jim Marrs wrote in his book entitled Our Occulted History about a person named John Perkins who saw global financial manipulation and actively participated in it. He wrote a book entitled Confessions of an Economic Hitman. His consulting firm sent him around the world. He describes the activities of economic hitmen as highly paid professionals who cheat countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. They funnel money from the World Bank, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and other foreign aid organizations into the coffers of huge corporations and the pockets of a few wealthy families who control the planet's natural resources. Their tools included fraudulent financial reports, rigged elections, payoffs, extortion, sex and murder. They play a game as old as empire, but one that has taken on new and terrifying dimensions during this time of globalization. Perkins said that his job was to enslave nations that had resources our corporations coveted by burdening them with debts they could never repay. We then demanded that they sell those resources cheap, without social or environmental regulations, to our corporations. It was an incredibly successful strategy. In essence, it created the world's first truly global empire and the first one that was not built primarily through military corporations. It also transformed geopolitics. The power of elected officials was usurped by those who sit at the top of the multinational corporations. Perkins says that the multinational corporations soon realized that similar strategies had the potential for being used in the U.S. to prevent the masses from exercising democratic rights that could potentially threaten its wars and its other interests. He says that by 1980, the multinational corporations understood that its most effective weapon to protect corporations against labor movements was debt. Borrowers were deceived into believing that they were paying low interest rates when in fact balloon payments, adjustable rate mortgages and other technically complex packages resulted in higher overall rates that made it increasingly difficult to break the shackles of debt. Regulations that protected our rights were demolished. New wars erupted. Family businesses were wiped out by the unfair practices of huge chains. The media was commandeered by a handful of giant conglomerates. Unemployment, poverty and foreclosures escalated. The upward trend of a growing and prosperous middle class plummeted. Perkins saves his most interesting remarks for last as he saw a mutant, viral and extremely dangerous form of capitalism has thrived under the ever-increasing powers of Wall Street, big business, and governments that support them. The global economic crisis is a symptom and a messenger. It has exposed our darkest secrets. The most materialistic and wealthiest nation in the history of the world, the US, also has the highest rates of suicide, drug abuse, murder, incarcerations and other negative social factors. Our economy is based upon fighting wars, killing people and ravaging the planet. trading paper in the form of mergers and derivatives and selling each other things that most of us don't need. Meanwhile, our planet is drowning in pollution, people are starving, our resources are dissipating, and our animals and plants are disappearing at shocking rates. At one major investment bank for which I worked, we used psychometric testing to recruit social psychopaths because their characteristics exactly suited them to senior corporate finance roles. This is a quote from a senior investment banker from the Independent newspaper.